In Pacific Heights, San Francisco, a neighborhood where every historic mansion whispers prestige, stood the Whitmore residence often jokingly called the Medical Museum. Unlike most homes, this one didn't display family portraits or vacation memories. Its walls were lined with framed diplomas, medical accolades, and photos with political dignitaries. To outsiders, the Whitmores were the pinnacle of American medical excellence. But to Aria, the youngest daughter, it was a house where love came with conditions and identity came pre-assigned. Her mother, Dr. Evelyn Whitmore, was a world-renowned neurosurgeon cited in textbooks and honored at medical summits. She didn't tolerate imperfection, not in her work, and certainly not in her daughter. Her father, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, had once helmed Golden Gate Medical Center, a role his father and grandfather had also held. In the Whitmore household, the doctor, before your name, wasn't just a title, it was a declaration of worth. Her older sister, Sienna, embodied everything the family cherished. Beautiful, poised, brilliant Sienna walked through life as if the world had conspired in her favor. She graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins' swept academic and beauty awards and represented the golden standard of the Whitmore legacy. Every photo in the house glowed with her image. Aria, in contrast, felt like a blurry afterthought, a shadow on the edge of every frame. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" was the family refrain repeated so often it became the soundtrack of Aria's adolescence. She didn't look like Sienna, didn't excel in biology or chemistry. She didn't dream in blood types and surgeries. She dreamed in chart strategy and user acquisition. At age 12, she started a neighborhood dog walking service that grew to 15 regular clients. She learned client retention and basic profit margins. She managed 2 helpers. She was proud until her mother found out. "Whitmores don't scoop poop for cash," Evelyn declared at the dinner table, her tone icier than the bone china. "We heal. We don't hustle." Her father chimed in without lowering his medical journal. "You're wasting time on things that won't take you anywhere." Their dismissal stung in ways Aria couldn't describe. Despite joining science clubs, studying until her eyes blurred, entering the state science fair 3 years in a row, she still couldn't win their approval. An A meant a furrowed brow. A compliment meant comparison to Sienna. She lived with the aching sense that she was off-brand, a defective product in a family known for perfection. In her senior year of high school, Aria quietly applied to top business schools while her family assumed she'd follow their footsteps. It wasn't rebellion. It was survival. She didn't want to wear a stethoscope. She wanted to fix the system behind the scenes. She saw herself not in scrubs, but in strategy meetings designing healthcare that worked for people. But in the Whitmore household, choosing another path was betrayal. A rejection not just of medicine, but of them. Aria knew her decision would eventually spark confrontation. She also knew the only thing more painful than losing their approval was losing herself. Aria Whitmore first discovered what passion really felt like one spring afternoon in 7th grade when she was handed her first ever $20 bill. It came from Mrs. Koenig, her elderly neighbor, in exchange for walking her chunky pug around the neighborhood park. That moment wasn't like getting an A on a chemistry quiz or a rare nod from her mother. It was something else entirely: satisfaction. Ownership. A spark of self-worth measured not by family legacy, but by her own effort. From that moment on, Aria expanded. She designed hand-drawn flyers, tacked them up at laundromats, corner stores, even the local vet's office. Soon demand outpaced her ability to manage alone. She brought on 2 classmates to help on weekends. She tracked income and expenses on an Excel spreadsheet, calculated profit margins, and created a pay structure. Within 3 months, She'd earned nearly $800, an impressive feat for a 13-year-old. But she didn't tell anyone at home. Not because she wasn't proud, but because she already knew what their reaction would be. She didn't have to wait long. One Monday night during dinner, served with all the Whitmore formalities, cloth napkins, polished silverware, and crystal glasses, her mother asked, "Why do you smell like dog?" Aria, startled, she answered, "I was working, dog walking. I run a small service." The room chilled instantly. Evelyn set down her spoon slowly with the precision of a scalpel. "Dog walking, I have clients. I manage a schedule, coordinate shifts, and Whitmores don't work for tips." Her mother snapped, especially not scooping up dog feces. Her father, eyes still on his medical journal, added, "It's a distraction. You need to focus on your real goal." "Whose goal?" Aria asked, unable to stop herself. "I'm learning real things, business leadership, human behavior." Evelyn let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Save the market analysis for merchants, Aria. This family doesn't produce salespeople." That night, Aria tucked her earnings ledger away in a drawer, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew now her passion didn't belong here. It wasn't welcome. In their world, there was one path: medicine. Everything else was noise. Over time, Aria stopped sharing what made her proud. She no longer mentioned winning a business case competition at school or being selected by her teacher to assist in a summer startup workshop. When something good happened, she recorded it in her journal instead of speaking it aloud. Silence became a shield. While Sienna recounted lab results and shadowing hours at Golden Gate Medical soaking in their parents' admiration, Aria was quietly building her first online shop. She designed custom academic planners, marketed them through student forums, and shipped across the Bay Area. No lab coat, just a laptop and determination. She negotiated with local printers, analyzed customer feedback, adjusted her inventory model. She felt useful, capable. But at home, she was still the one who hadn't figured it out. At every family gathering, the script never changed. "So Aria, what are you studying these days?" "I'm exploring some options." "Well, not everyone can be Sienna. 1 star per household is enough, right?" She would smile politely, but inside a quiet vow was forming: one day they'll see. Not because I need revenge, because I need to prove that another path can lead to brilliance too. High school graduation was supposed to be a proud milestone, but for Aria Whitmore, it felt like the final scene of a play she never agreed to star in. The stadium buzzed with cheers, sunlight glinting off caps and gowns. Names echoed one after another through the microphone. When hers was finally called Aria Whitmore Honors Graduate, she scanned the stands. Her mother was checking her watch. Her father scrolled through a medical journal on his phone. Neither looked up. Neither clapped. The diploma in her hand felt weightless, meaningless in a world where the only worthy paper bore a medical seal. That evening, the Whitmores hosted a graduation dinner. But it wasn't for Aria, not really. Despite being in her honor, there were no childhood photo collages, no heartfelt speech, no celebration. The guest list read like a who's who of the Bay Area medical scene: surgeons, hospital administrators, research partners. The entire night revolved around medical excellence, the family's cherished legacy, and of course Sienna, their shining daughter. Aria, in a pale blue dress, stood near the corner like forgotten furniture. But she had a secret. In her clutch was an acceptance letter, Stanford School of Business, with a partial scholarship. For 2 weeks she'd kept it hidden, not from shame, but from strategy. And tonight, when everyone assumed she'd follow the family blueprint, she planned to rewrite the script. Midway through the dinner, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore raised a glass. To Aria he began, who will carry on the Whitmore tradition at Harvard Medical this fall, pending official acceptance, of course. Aria's breath caught. Her hand closed over her clutch. "Actually," she said, her voice steady, "I won't be attending Harvard Med. I've chosen Stanford Business School. I've been accepted. I'm going." Silence fell, total, tangible. Her mother's champagne glass froze midair. Her father looked at her like she'd grown horns. "A strange joke," Arya Evelyn said. "It's not a joke." She pulled out the letter, holding it high. "This is real. This is what I want." Her father stood, his expression dark. "Put that away. We'll talk later." But her mother had already taken the letter, scanning it with increasing outrage. "This is unacceptable," she spat. "No Whitmore trades in business. We heal. We do not hustle spreadsheets." "I don't want to run a coffee shop," Arya said. "I want to transform hospital systems, make healthcare more efficient and humane." "Enough!" Her father slammed his hand on the table. Crystal trembled. Silence returned. Aunt Denise whispered to Grandma, "She's always been a bit different." Her cousin, a surgical resident, sighed. "Medicine's not for everyone." The dinner unraveled. It wasn't a celebration anymore, it was a trial. When the last guest left, her mother approached. "If you choose this path, don't expect anything from the Whitmore name. No money, no inheritance, and no family." Arya didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't need their permission. She had chosen her path, and that finally felt like freedom. The morning after the graduation party, the Whitmore mansion felt colder than usual, not from the air conditioning, but from the silence. Arya had barely slept. Her mind replayed the night before like a loop she couldn't turn off. But deep down, she knew there was nothing left to grieve. All that was left was to prepare to leave. The family meeting took place at 9 a.m. sharp in her father's study, a room lined with walnut bookshelves, leather chairs, and old black and white portraits of Whitmore doctors from generations past. Arya sat alone on one side of the heavy desk, like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Her parents sat across, composed. Sienna perched nearby, arms crossed, face unreadable. "We've thought about this," Dr. Jonathan Whitmore began, his tone as precise as a ticking clock. "And we've reached a decision. If you refuse to pursue medicine, then as of today, you are no longer part of this family." No discussion, no negotiation, no grace. "You're disowning me for choosing business?" Arya asked, her voice trembling, though her eyes stayed locked on theirs. "Don't be dramatic," her mother countered coolly. "We're offering you a choice, and any rational, moral person would know which one to make." There it was, not love, not understanding, just an ultimatum. "I choose my path," Arya said quietly. "Even if it means losing this house, this family, and everything that comes with the name Whitmore." Her father pulled out a folder from his drawer. "This is the formal paperwork. Our attorney has removed you from the will. The education trust in your name will be dissolved." Even Sienna blinked, surprised perhaps at the speed and finality, but only for a moment. "Guess I get to be an only child after all," she said with a smirk. Arya rose to her feet, feeling like her body was floating disconnected from itself. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. She walked silently upstairs, shut her bedroom door, and began packing. Clothes, a few books, her aging laptop, one suitcase, one backpack. That was it. When she rolled her bag down the front steps, no one followed. No one said goodbye. No hugs. No tears. Just the cold indifference of a house that should have been a home. Rachel Myers, the only friend she trusted completely, was waiting at the end of the street in her beat-up old car. She didn't ask questions, just popped the trunk and said, "You can stay as long as you need." Rachel's tiny apartment wasn't fancy, but it had something the Whitmore mansion never did: warmth. The first weeks were brutal. Arya couldn't afford to enroll at Stanford immediately, even with the scholarship. She had to defer. To survive, she juggled 3 part-time jobs, early mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons, as a receptionist, weekends at a retail store. At night, she collapsed onto Rachel's couch, counting pennies and stretching dollars. One night, Rachel looked at her and said softly, "You're burning yourself out. Isn't there a better way?" "I have to save enough," Aria replied. "If not for Stanford, then for state school. I just need a foot in the door." So she started again. No mansion, no trust fund, no family. But for the first time in her life, Aria had something far more important: herself. By the end of that summer, Aria enrolled at California State University, a modest public college that offered one thing she desperately needed: a new beginning. Her scholarship covered part of the tuition. The rest came from student loans and sheer determination. She rented a tiny, crumbling studio apartment on the edge of Oakland duct-taped windows, faulty heating and peeling walls. But for the first time, she felt free. It wasn't much, but it was hers. During the day, Aria studied hard. At night, she worked part-time jobs. Every morning, she endured a 40-minute bus ride to campus, often reviewing notes or writing outlines on her lap as the bus bumped along cracked roads. Her dinners were instant noodles or toast. She wasn't living poorly, she was investing in something her family had never believed in herself. In a course on healthcare business administration, Aria submitted a paper analyzing inefficiencies in hospital administrative systems. Unlike her classmates, she didn't just focus on financials. She wrote about exhausted nurses' redundant paperwork and the loss of human connection between patients and providers. After class, Professor Alan Kim stopped her. "You see this system differently," he said, tapping her paper. "You're not just looking at numbers. You're looking at people." Aria smiled quietly. She didn't explain that she'd grown up in a household where dinner conversations revolved around surgery schedules and electronic charting errors. For years, she had heard more about medical burnout than bedtime stories. That insight, once a source of alienation, was now her advantage. From that day forward, Professor Kim became her informal mentor. He recommended journal articles, connected her with industry reports, and encouraged her to think beyond theory. Slowly, an idea began forming in Aria's mind: a digital platform to streamline medical administration, cutting paperwork, so doctors could spend more time with patients. The idea was born from a simple question: why was her mother, one of the best surgeons in the state, always complaining about the system? Aria began sketching software interfaces on notebook paper, researching existing medical systems, and uncovering a fundamental flaw: most healthcare software was designed by people who weren't doctors or patients. They didn't understand real-world needs. In her spare hours, she read industry white papers, drafted a rough business plan, and started looking for collaborators. She had no funding, no network, but she had something rare: an insider's perspective from the outside. No one in her family knew what she was building. If they had, they might have laughed. But Aria didn't need them anymore. She was building something bigger: a solution, a future, a reason to keep going. The idea was no longer just in Aria's head. It had spilled onto paper, into Excel spreadsheets, and onto the cracked screen of her well-worn laptop. She called the project MedCore, a system designed to return medicine to its true center: people, not paperwork. Her first office was a shared co-working space in Oakland. The rent was cheap. The perks: a folding chair, glitchy Wi-Fi, and constant noise from the sandwich shop next door. Aria slept on a futon stuffed in the corner, curled under a coat at night. Her savings covered just enough for peanut butter sandwiches and the cost of a basic website. In the first 6 months, Aria pitched over 20 investors. Most said no, some were blunt. "Healthcare's too complicated, too regulated. You're not a doctor. Why would anyone listen to you? No connections. No chance." She didn't argue. She nodded, then went home and rewrote her pitch. She learned to answer every objection with humility and hard data. She recruited 2 fresh-out-of-college programmers, both underestimated in their own ways, to join as co-founders in exchange for equity. They worked like possessed coders living on cold pizza and instant coffee. Every time a bug got fixed, they cheered like kids finishing a puzzle. It wasn't glamorous, but slowly MedCore began to take shape. Aria didn't target big hospitals. She knew better. They wouldn't risk their legacy systems for a no-name startup. Instead, she approached small clinics, community health centers, places where doctors handled admin because they couldn't afford staff. Where they didn't need a comprehensive solution, they just needed something that worked. A small clinic in Fremont agreed to a 3-month pilot. Aria nearly cried when she saw the approval email. After countless sleepless nights, it was the first real opportunity. 3 months later, MedCore had reduced administrative time by 28%. Billing errors dropped over 30%. Most importantly, physicians said they could now spend an extra 10 to 15 minutes with each patient. And with that, the dominoes started falling. Clinics began referring others. Data told the story louder than she ever could. Larger health organizations started paying attention to the name MedCore, but Aria still lived like bankruptcy could knock any minute. She rotated between the same 3 button-downs for every meeting. Her car's side mirror was held on with duct tape. She refused to upgrade to a real office. She still slept on the futon. Because to Aria, this startup wasn't just a company. It was a statement. A living declaration that she deserved to exist, even if she'd never become Dr. Whitmore. MedCore was no longer a pilot project. After its early success in Fremont, the name began to circulate quietly like a secret every clinic wanted to keep but couldn't. Within a year, Aria and her tiny team had deployed the system to over 20 independent clinics, from San Mateo to Sacramento. The data spoke for itself. MedCore didn't just cut costs, it elevated patient care. Reports showed a 17% increase in patient satisfaction, an average of 11 more minutes spent per consultation, and a nearly 40% reduction in billing errors. That's when the bigger players started paying attention. A mid-sized hospital network under post-pandemic financial pressure agreed to pilot MedCore. Aria's team spent 3 months customizing the system for their workflows. When the results came in 24% reduction in administrative overhead, rave reviews from medical staff, and patient data synced twice as fast, industry insiders began whispering her name. A healthcare-focused venture capital firm offered $2 million in exchange for 15% equity. After long nights of deliberation and mentorship from Professor Kim, Aria said yes. With the funding secured, she moved MedCore into its first real office, a modest space in San Francisco, with big windows overlooking Mission Street. She hired engineers, support staff, and a small team for client relations. And yet she still lived in the same apartment, drove the same duct-taped car, and carried the same old laptop. "You know you can afford a little comfort now, right?" Rachel joked once. "I'll rest when MedCore fixes the system," Aria replied with a smile. For her, success wasn't about luxury, it was about impact. She began receiving invitations to speak at health tech conferences, to share her perspective at panels on healthcare reform. Trade journals started profiling her as the outsider changing the inside. One article in Healthcare Innovations Weekly read, "She's not a doctor, and that may be her greatest strength." Aria Whitmore sees what the system has forgotten. Ironically, the very rejection she faced from her medical family gave her the clarity to see the industry differently. Now the same world that once dismissed her was listening. MedCore's expansion accelerated. More clinics signed on. Larger systems expressed interest. And Aria, once labeled not bright enough, not worthy, was suddenly the person hospital executives were calling for meetings. When the phone rang at midnight with a partnership offer from a major medical center, Aria would smile to herself. She didn't need her family to believe in her. She had built something that proved itself. On a quiet June morning, Aria was flipping through a wedding magazine while waiting at a salon in Soma. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. But then she froze. There, under a full-page photo of a smiling couple, were the words, Sienna Whitmore and Dr. Lucas Grant. Aria's breath caught. Lucas Grant, Director of Medical Technology Implementation at Golden State Health. The same Lucas Grant whose team was currently working with MedCore on one of their largest integrations to date. And Sienna, her older sister, the same one who had humiliated her in front of their entire family, was marrying him. Of course, Aria whispered. Of all people. She closed the magazine, but the thought spun like a storm. It had been 9 years since she last saw Sienna or their parents. No calls, no texts, not even a birthday email. She wasn't the girl packing a suitcase anymore. She was the CEO of a company reshaping healthcare without their validation. When she told Michael, her boyfriend, a pediatrician at Golden State, his expression turned serious. They don't deserve any more space in your head, he said gently. But if this is something you need to face, then face it. For you. She thought about it for days. She wasn't going to crash the wedding for revenge. She wasn't looking for a scene. But the truth was, something still ached deep inside. Unfinished business. So she decided to go. No RSVP, no announcement, just her presence. The same way they erased her quietly without notice, she would return. The wedding was held at the Fairmont, San Francisco, a towering emblem of old money and polished tradition. Aria arrived alone, dressed in a sleek navy gown, her hair soft around her shoulders, her expression composed. The doorman didn't question her. Confidence was its own invitation. She walked past the guest registry, picked up a glass of champagne, and positioned herself quietly near a floral display. From there, she could see her mother, Evelyn Whitmore, radiant among a circle of elite physicians. Her father laughed with the dean of a major medical school. And then came Sienna on Lucas Grant's arm, dazzling in white lace. The same Sienna from the magazine cover. Perfect. Untouchable. Aria didn't flinch. She wasn't here to cause a scene, but she didn't hide either. Then came the inevitable. A distant relative did a double take. Aria, my goodness, is that you? Her mother turned. Evelyn's face shifted from confusion to shock to something far colder. She cut through the crowd with practiced elegance and venom. You weren't invited, she hissed low and sharp. Leave, before you embarrass yourself further. Aria met her gaze, calm, steady. I'm here to congratulate my sister, quietly, from the corner. Just like you always made me stand in this family. A voice interrupted from the side, Lucas Grant clearly confused, sensing the tension. What's going on here? And just like that, amid silk gowns and crystal flutes, the past began to resurface. And for the first time, Aria didn't look away. The ballroom of the Fairmont fell noticeably quiet as Aria stood face to face with Evelyn and Lucas. Eyes turned toward them. A few guests subtly raised their phones, sensing something unscripted was unfolding. Who are you? Lucas asked again, glancing from Aria to Evelyn. Why are you so upset about her being here? It's just a misunderstanding, Evelyn cut in quickly. She's an old acquaintance. Not on the guest list. Aria gave a faint smile. It wasn't bitter. It was tired. You really don't know who I am, she asked calmly. You're overseeing the MedCore implementation, aren't you? Lucas blinked. The skepticism gave way to surprise. Wait, Aria. Whitmore, CEO of MedCore. She nodded once. A hush dropped over the room. Lucas turned to Evelyn. Why didn't you tell me? Evelyn swallowed hard. It's not relevant. We don't acknowledge her as family. Aria spoke again, this time with a voice that needed no elevation to be heard. Not acknowledged. That's fine. But the irony, Lucas, is that the system I built is the reason your hospital survived post-COVID cutbacks. Another voice entered the circle. Dr. Charles Leland, chairman of the Golden State Hospital Board, stepped forward. Aria Whitmore. The anonymous donor who helped fund our tech center, he asked, genuinely stunned. She nodded again. I didn't want my name public for personal reasons, But I guess that's changing today. The air thickened. Evelyn turned pale. Her husband, Jonathan Whitmore, had just approached, catching the final sentence. He stood frozen, his hand tightening around his wine glass. "You walked away from the Whitmore name," he said, voice still sharp with authority. "No," Arya replied. "You abandoned me. I simply chose not to chase people who didn't want me." Then slowly and deliberately she opened her clutch and pulled out a folded letter. A note she'd written years ago in therapy, never sent, never burned. "Since everyone's here," she said, "I'd like to read something." No one stopped her. Her voice was steady, clear. "When you cut me off, it wasn't just money you took. You told me I was unworthy of love unless I became who you wanted. But I don't live for your pride anymore. I've learned to love myself without titles, without approval. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here to say I never needed to apologize." No applause, none needed. Only a silence that felt heavier than any outburst and far more permanent. She folded the letter and placed it back into her purse. Then she looked around the room and said softly, "I wish you happiness, Sienna." Then without another word, she walked away step by step out of the shadow of her past. As Arya stepped out of the Fairmont and into the crisp San Francisco breeze, she felt a strange sense of calm. Not because anything had ended neatly, not because she had been embraced, but because for the first time she no longer felt the need to earn their love. Michael was waiting by the car, concern etched on his face. But when he saw her walking steadily toward him, he didn't say anything. Just opened the door and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" For the first time she said, "I think I am," and she meant it. In the days following the wedding, word of the encounter spread throughout San Francisco's medical circles. A few anonymous forum posts recounted the incident as a slap in a silk glove at $1 million wedding. Many admired Arya's calm composure in the face of chaos. What Arya didn't expect was that her family started reaching out. First an email from Evelyn, "We should talk, maybe things went too far." Then a voicemail from her father, "Let the past stay in the past. Family is forever." Even Sienna texted, "He doesn't understand me. We need to talk." Arya didn't respond immediately. She thought carefully, not because she was wavering, but because she needed to ask herself, have they truly changed, or are they just trying to reclaim what they think they lost? She agreed to meet her parents at a neutral cafe in Presidio, not at the mansion, not at her office, a place where no one held power. Evelyn arrived first, perfectly made up but visibly strained. Jonathan came later, still in his white coat, as if clinging to identity. "Arya," her mother began, "we were wrong. We were too rigid. And seeing what you've built, we're proud of you. Truly, it shouldn't take success to deserve love," Arya replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "Love should never have been conditional." Her father spoke up, trying for steadiness. "Let's just move forward. You're still our daughter." Arya shook her head gently. "You're saying that now because the world values me. Would you be here if I had failed?" The question hung between them like fog. "You once told me I wasn't smart or beautiful or worth anything beyond your name," she continued. "You don't need to apologize. But I won't come back, not like this. Not on terms that still protect your pride." Evelyn looked down at her coffee, nodding slowly. No tears, no dramatics, just a long overdue truth resting quietly between them. Not long after, Arya received an interview request from a national finance magazine. The topic, forgiveness in leadership and life. She declined, because to her, forgiveness wasn't a press release. It wasn't something you gave just to make someone else feel better. Forgiveness was a journey. And part of that journey was setting boundaries that protected your future. Instead of returning to a family that once erased her, Arya doubled down on the family she had built, friends, colleagues, and the students she now mentored through the Fresh Start Foundation. She hosted her first mentoring circle at MedCorps headquarters, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a woman who had chosen to rise. A freshman asked her, "If you could go back, would you have forgiven them earlier?" Arya smiled. "No," she said, "because sometimes the best thing you can do is to never go back at all." After that final meeting with her parents in Presidio, Arya didn't feel empty like she once feared. There was no sharp ache, no delayed tears, just the quiet clarity of closing a door that had long ceased to fit, and a whisper deep inside, "I've finally walked away for good." The silence from her family that followed didn't sting anymore. Instead, it felt like a blank canvas one she filled with the life she had created, her work at MedCore, the mentoring circles at Fresh Start Foundation, and her growing bond with Michael, the one man who had never tried to define her by success or titles. In the months after Sienna's wedding, Arya focused on scaling MedCore beyond California. She no longer micromanaged the front lines. Instead, she learned to delegate hiring a COO, a head of HR, and writing the company's first internal culture manifesto titled "Empathy is a Strength, Not a Soft Skill." When a major hospital system in Chicago signed on to adopt MedCore across their entire network, Arya didn't pop champagne. Instead, she organized a simple lunch in the office where every team member shared why they had joined the healthcare space. One engineer spoke of her mother, a rural nurse who spent nights buried in paperwork. A young intern said her little brother had missed vital vaccinations because of a hospital records error. Arya listened quietly. She felt no need to speak. She was no longer the rejected daughter, no longer the CEO with something to prove. She had become something more grounded, a builder of systems where people mattered again. She began to write not a memoir, not a business book, but a series of personal essays about trauma boundaries and rebuilding identity. One of the first essays was titled, "When They Don't Choose You as Family." It went viral. Emails poured in from strangers, adult children disowned for being different. Young founders mocked for choosing passion over prestige caregivers who once believed their pain was personal. They didn't thank Arya for being successful. They thanked her for telling the truth about what it took. One crisp autumn afternoon, after a keynote at a Boston Healthcare Innovation Summit, a woman approached her holding a printed copy of that essay. "I'm the mother of a 24-year-old who just left law school to study pastry," she said, voice trembling. "I thought she was throwing her life away, but after reading your piece, I'm learning to listen." Arya took the paper, a warm weight in her hands. She didn't feel like a hero or a symbol, just someone whose voice had finally been heard. 3 years after Sienna's wedding, Arya stood barefoot on the sand at her own wedding ceremony, the breeze playing gently with the hem of her ivory gown. There was no orchestra, no glittering crowd. Just Michael, a circle of friends she had chosen as family-trusted colleagues, and a few scholarship recipients from Fresh Start Foundation, young lives she had helped reshape. No one from the Whitmore family attended, and that absence felt right, like a thread finally snipped clean, no longer pulling on her ribs. When her father passed away from a stroke, Evelyn sent a short email. "Your father has died. The funeral is Tuesday, in case you care. No invitation, no apology, just a transaction." Arya considered going not for him, but for closure. But in the end, she stayed home, because she owed them nothing anymore. As she stood across from Michael reciting her vows, Arya didn't speak of soulmates or fairy tales. She said, "You're the first person who didn't ask me to be someone else to be loved. And that love was the first thing that made me believe I was worth choosing, not for what I'd done, but for who I am." Tears streamed down Michael's face. And for the first time in her life, Arya felt wholly unquestionably chosen without test condition or legacy. After the ceremony, they held a small outdoor reception. Rachel, the friend who once picked her up in an old car the night she was cast out, gave a toast her voice warm with memory and mischief. The woman in the dress today once slept on my couch, lived off instant noodles, and had the kind of stubbornness that could move mountains. Rachel said, laughing. She didn't just build a company. She rebuilt herself from the ruins of a family that refused to see her. There were tears, but none of pity, only pride. A few months later, Arya received an invitation to speak at a university commencement. For the first time, she took the stage not as the daughter they threw away, but as someone who had rewritten the definition of freedom. She didn't speak about success. She spoke about agency. Family isn't always where we begin. Sometimes we have to leave poisoned roots to replant ourselves in better soil with better light. The students rose to their feet, not because she had overcome, but because they saw themselves in her story. True freedom, Arya had come to understand, wasn't about receiving forgiveness. It was realizing you no longer needed it. She no longer attached her identity to pain. She no longer used the Whitmore name in bios or interviews. She no longer told the old story for validation, only as a reminder. We all have the right to redefine family, and sometimes that begins with the courage to say no.